Well, here's a quick tip that request that's pretty straightforward. Simply ask, how do you capture leaves and foliage in a crowded forest? I'm going to show you a little exercise that's really foolproof. The reason beginning painters, I want to be careful about that. Maybe some emerging painters get sometimes really baffled about a subject, is that you're looking for the subject itself, looking for the wrong thing. We will usually try to paint at least what our eyes are focused on. And so if we learn how to refocus our attention, then we can find easy ways to do things that appear to be difficult. And that's what this is about. Now, when you have a forest where it's really, really thick, lots and lots and lots of trees. So I just found one on Pixabay, a photo of one on Pixabay that does just that. Look first for the shadow, because usually in thick forest, there's lots and lots of shadow. Now, those of you who are accustomed to my quick tips and lessons and so forth know that I always begin with light and shadow. But I'm going to do a little shortcutting here and show you a little process that can enable you to see the shadow and then build the process on just the shadow. So if you look here and squint, I have to emphasize that, squint, you can see that very little really strong light is visible here in this photograph. We have some backlight, and usually in forests that's what you're going to see. Even when you're turned in whatever direction, if you are in the forest, the light usually is coming from behind, and sometimes it's not. So I'm not going to make a rule about that. I don't like rules anyway. Okay, but let me just go forward. What I will do here, first of all, is I'll pretend that the whole thing is in shadow. And then we will lift out the light and build on that. And I'll show you how simple it is when we just look for the shadow part, forget that it's leaves and forest and all that kind of stuff. Just forget that stuff and just look for shadow. So what I'm going to do first is I'm dipping my brush in some Gamsol. And before I started the quick tip, I put out colors that I knew will give me what I'm looking at here in the way of greens. So I've just got a line here of yellow greens going from the darkest dark to the lightest light, and the complement of yellow green, which is red violet here. And those are the only two colors along with white that really only two that we need for this, along with white, get all those variations that we see. So there's the first thing. Then I'll dip my brush in some Gamsol and go just to the edge of the darkest, most transparent green that I have on the palette, or the yellow green that I have on the palette. And now I want to get that pretty thin. I'll add just a little bit more Gamsol to it. Put it right here to the side. And I'll load my brush. And if you have a larger canvas, use a larger brush. So choose the brush according to the size of the brush, according to the size of the canvas. But what I'll do here is I'll just throw in a whole area of this wash like this, and I don't have to worry about the values of it because we're just going to be looking for shadow here, not the values of shadow. And sometimes people have trouble distinguishing that. Well, just think in terms of shadow alone. That you're going to be looking for a diagram of just shadow. So I'll just put this on, and this is just a wash. You can do this sort of thing if you're working really, really small. If you have one of those pen brushes like the Tombow pen brush, for very, very small things where you're just doing practice exercises, you can use that, or you can just use the paint. Now this is oil paint I'm using here. You can do this with acrylic. If you do it with acrylic, you know that acrylic's going to dry fast, and so it's better to use an acrylic medium that is a slower drying. It's going to slow down the drying. If you use just water for doing this in acrylic, you need to work fast, and you may need to fine mist it and keep it from drying fast with you, on you. So now I'm going to rinse the brush out, and I'm putting that brush down. Now I'm going to pick up a stiffer brush here, and I'm going to look here just for where I see light. So if I can just lift out of this just where I see light, then I'll have only shadow left. So I see a little bit of light right up here, so I'll just lift that out. And this, with oil paint, you can lift out very, very well without having to dampen the brush. But if you see that it doesn't want to come out, you just dampen the brush just a little bit with some Gamsol, and it will. Now you see right here, this tiny little bit of light, that's what I'm lifting out. Now I'm not going to lift this part out yet. What I want to do is I'm going to go back over here. I'm seeing here this tree in front of that area behind there, and the foliage crossing it is causing some light to come through there. So what I'll do is use the back of my palette knife as a mask, and I'll sort of, I'll just position it about right here, and that will give me the area for the tree. And I'll just sort of lift out on top of the palette knife, and I'll show you what that will give you here. And see, I'm just lifting just enough, lifting out just enough here to pull out that light that I'm seeing right there. Now the palette knife, of course this is still very wet right here, so the palette knife picked up a little bit on this side, but that's okay because it so happens on the other side I'm seeing lots of light. So I can do this, and once again I'll just dampen that brush just a little bit and put the palette knife down like this and lift out the entire. Now you see some tiny trees back there too that are in sort of in a shadow area. Don't try to do small stuff when you're doing this sort of thing. Not try to, because if you try to do small stuff, it gets confusing. You can put that small stuff in later, but just lift out the general areas. And see, by holding the palette knife there and creating a mask of that tree, then I was able to lift out that little light area. And then I come over here and I can do the same thing. Now I can just use the brush and just move in like this with a brush and come down and lift out for that tree that's in the, for this next tree there. And then as I move along, moving along in this direction, I can do the same thing here. And I can lift out. There's going to be a little bit larger area of light right in there. And so we can just lift that out. And then I will move. I see some light foliage moving in front of that tree. See that right there? So I'll just lift that out. And then I see that foliage moving, catching light as it moves on out like this. So I'll just do that like this. Now, when I get down to this part right here, I'm just seeing little patterns of light that I can lift out with the tip of this brush. By the way, this is just a very stiff brush. It is an ivory made by Rosemary and Company. And it's a really good one for doing these little lift out exercises, or if you're doing a painting, just doing straightforward lift out for these little no-tans I enjoy doing. That works. This works great. This brush works great for that. If it's larger areas, you can also just lift it out with a paper towel, but I'm still going to stick with the brush on this one. Now we have a little bit of light down in here, and so I'll just kind of roll the brush around on its tip a little bit, kind of loosely here, and lift out for that area of light. And you can see already we're getting the light that we see here, and what we didn't lift out is left in shadow. And we would continue that. Now, you know, I like to keep these quick tips relatively short. If I don't, some folks will end up getting bored and they'll the log out. Now here I'm just pulling out the light I see on the edge of the tree there. And there is Charlie chiming in. And we've become accustomed to Charlie's chiming. All right, now I'm not going to go throughout the whole thing because I don't want to have to, I don't want to take that time. I want to do just enough, as I said, it's going to be an exercise for you. If you will just use small sheets of some sort, if you're using oil paint, you'll just use canvas, primed canvas. Or if you're using acrylic, you can, whatever material you work on, or any other kind of water media. For watercolor, you can do this. For watercolor, you would put the wash in wet on damp, put it in very broadly, and while it's still damp, wait for the gloss to go in. While it's still damp, take a paper towel or a brush. You can lift out with a brush in watercolor too. So the method is really accommodating to all different kinds of media that we use. So I'm just going to stop this part right here and show you where I go from there. Now, once this is a no-tan, by the way. This is a no-tan is simply in the Western culture as related to realistic painting. No-tan is simply a design of light and shadow, or a design that represents light and shadow. That's what no-tan is. Now we can take that now, and within all the areas that are in shadow, we can find the values and the colors that belong there. In all the areas in light, we can do the same thing. So the next step would just be to block in those areas very general. Don't try to make leaves yet, but just block in those areas very generally. And it's always better if you block in the shadow portion first, or I say always, sometimes blocking in light portions when there's lots of overlap, such as having a sky, lots and lots of sky come through. So, but when you block in the shadow portion first, it guides you for developing the light. So you see, we haven't even said the word foliage yet. We're not even concerned with that. But you'll notice that everything groups itself. Those dark greens group themselves. Address it as a group of shapes first. Just a group. Don't even think about leaves. If you try to think about leaves at this point, you divert your attention away from your ability to see what's really there. And so I'm just going to work just a little portion here like I usually do on these quick tips. And so I'm starting there with a very deep dark shadow that I see. And let's say right about in this area right in here. That very, very deep dark shadow. So I'll reach for the very, very dark and put just of the green, and I'll put a little bit of the red violet in it, just sort of to desaturate that just a hair there, not much. And I might have put too much there. Okay, now I'm going to pull a little bit of my middle value of that color into the brush, and so that I don't have just a single color. I want sort of a variation, and then I'll just start right in here. And all you have to do here is simply block in that as one dark shadow area. That's all. And you can roll your brush around there for getting the foliage stroke, they call it. Depends on what you're seeing there. But you can roll the brush around. It doesn't have to be specific strokes. It shouldn't be. Certainly shouldn't be at this phase. It's just a block in, meaning that you are laying in the color and the values of whatever shape or shapes or group of shapes you're looking at. All we're doing there is just simply laying in, placing very thinly. We don't use thick paint for this stage. You use the paint, or put it on just enough to cover. Don't add no liquid or no medium of any sort here. It's not going on thinly. That's not the purpose. When I say not thick, I mean don't pile the paint up. We have that paint just enough on the surface to cover the surface, and that's it. So, and the reason for that is if you pile in a whole bunch of medium on this, when you go to to build the colors, it's going to be so wet that you're not going to be able to manage it. It's just, it has a tendency to get out of control if it's too wet. All right, so let's just go more quickly here now. And this one ends up being a little bit lighter as it moves up into this area in here. And so I'll move over into the more middle value of that yellow green, and let's just pick up those lighter areas there. And so I'll just roll the brush around, and I'm just applying that value of those color of that middle. Now applying the middle value of that yellow green. And this is what I would do. Move throughout the entire area, blocking in according to the value, general value area and general color area that I'm seeing. So let's just move this right here, a little bit more right in there. Now I'll put a little bit more over here because I'm just going to use this area right in here to show you how this works. All right, so now we just see it darker down there, and we see some of those little darks right in here. Okay, I will continue that throughout the whole piece. Now the next thing I want to do is to move in towards that red violet and block in the shadows of the tree trunks. So the red violet, I'll move into the red violet here, and you will see, you think those tree trunks are gray, you think they're brown. No, that's not what we're seeing. If you were in nature, you wouldn't see that either. You'll see some hue coming through, but whatever hue you're seeing coming through should be the color that you choose. So I'm seeing that on this photograph is coming through as sort of in that red violet, and a lot of times tree trunks will, because of the green around them, the neutrality of the tree trunk will make our eyes see a very desaturated red violet. So that's what we're doing here. And then to put that in, and what we'll do now is we will block in just all the darker tree trunk areas, just that shape of that color. And so we can do that like this. You see how very dark that is. Now I'm going to lighten that just a bit because it's just a little too dark. So let's pull this in here, and you can watch that turn more neutral. But I want to keep it leaning towards red violet. Now we'll just move right over in here like that and get a little bit more variation in that dark shadow so it doesn't just look like a black hole. There we go, that's better. All right, now pull on down and seeing it come down like this. I pull it on down, there's some foliage down in there, and I may see a little tree trunk business coming out here like that. And then let's just move on up now, and we will block in just what we see of that tree trunk. The trunks of the trees tend to define it as forest, and it's always amazed me how when we get the values and colors of the trunks of the trees blocked in, how it really does communicate the forest itself. So just sort of put that in, and let's see what happens there. It really goes off the edge, sort of like that. And so there's the block in for that tree trunk. And of course I would use that same process, go over here, block in this tree trunk, wherever I see it dark, wherever I see it really in dark shadow, I would come over here and do the same thing. And since this is the area I'm working in, I'll just do that here. And I think I put an extra tree in there, which is perfectly fine. We are artists. We can edit trees. And I'm just going to go ahead and slip, because that makes a nice little interval there between this tree trunk and that one. And remember, it's not tree trunk I'm doing. I say that to point you to where I am. It's not tree trunk. It's the shadow on the tree trunk. That's what we're painting. And remember what I said, if you're going to paint what you have your attention on. So if you have your attention on the shadow of the tree trunk, that's what you'll see, and you'll know how to do it. if you know, if you could get your painting techniques halfway down. All right, so now let's just assume I've gone through the whole piece like that. This is the area I want to show you. So I'm going to switch now and block in just general light, the general light areas I see. So what do we see in here? We see some light green, and that light green seems to be reflecting a bluer light. And so in that case, what we can do is, I'll just put a little bit of white right here. And if we mix, I'm going to go straight back over here and mix a little bit of that dark in here to a middle value. Let's get a big pile of that. That will give us then, when you mix white straight into a very, very dark color that has yellow in it, it turns cool. Turns like a blue-green. See that? But if you mix yellow, you can raise the value and it stays yellow-green. I'm talking about when you mix it into those very, very dark, transparent greens, such as sap green, which is what this is. All right, now I can move back and forth between this and this, and I can begin to sort of block in what I'm seeing right in here. So we'll just do this part first. And again, I'll just use the brush, turn the brush and stroke it on one side and then on another. Instead of, you just keep going forward. You certainly don't want to overstroke. See, now see, that begins to give us then a value area of the light we see shining on those leaves. Let's see, what do we have down there? Oh, I have a little bit of a overlap of a leaf right there. And let's see, okay, we can do this right here. Overlap that, and so on and so on. And then up here, what we see is we don't see that blue-green up here. We see that light coming through the distance in a more yellow-green. And so what we'll do there, get a fresh paper towel here, wiping the brush. What we'll do there is we'll block in that in a light yellow-green. Now I'm going to, first of all, take the yellow-green mixture. This is the sap green mixed with Hansa yellow light. I'm just going to take that, and I can show you. Now see, that's a little bit too saturated, so we need to add just a little bit of this red violet to that. Cut down on that saturation. May have to add a little bit of white back to that too. Let's see. Let's try that and see. That still is a little bit too saturated. So see, the point here is to get this initial block in the colors, the values, and the right saturation of what we see. And I'm pulling a little bit of this desaturated green. Now I believe that's closer to it right there. Yes, can you see? It's a little bit closer to that. All right, so what we'll do there is we simply block that in. And I think because we don't see very much texture in that, we'll just block it in like this. Let it come right behind this. It's a little bit of that peeking in behind here, like that. And pushing it in right here, right behind that tree trunk. And I see that got just a little bit muddy there. So what I'll do is just blend that out. There we go, like that. And then this, of course, would then overlap over into here. We won't follow through. So we'll see that over here, and we see it over here, and we see it over here, and so forth as we continue. From this point, now let's assume that I've moved all the way through all this, and I've simply found the general, when I say general, I mean without detail, without strong variations, without detail. So I place the general values and the general colors in their values that I see. And then once that's done, then we can begin to do the refinement. Now, probably the person that asked this question already has some experience in doing the detail. Most people will, because Too many painters go right for detail, very first thing. And then the thing begins to fall apart, because if you start to put the detail in first, the whole piece starts fragmenting. So once you take that attitude of general color value areas, no detail, then you can go back and begin to work the detail, or work what we call refinement. Now what I'm going to do here, we see this is beginning, this looks just a little bit too much. Well, if you look up here, you see a little bit more of that yellow green coming through, but we really see it overlap by detail. And if you look real close there, you see that more as a very light red violet. So what I'm do there, now I'm going to begin to put in the details of the lights. And I like to work, I'm going to put just a little bit of green in here, knock that down. We want that, don't want that to be too, we don't want it to be too saturated. Work is a good policy to sequence the work so that you create the background areas first. Whatever's in the distance, if you when you're doing this part especially, if we look at what's in the distance and get that create that first, then the other stuff overlaps that, and it makes it a lot easier technically, a lot easier to do. And so I've just carried that through there like that. Do we see any of that coming down? A little bit of it coming down in here, and then this other stuff here begins to overlap that, and that falls into that sort of cool blue green. That's beginning in that light area there. We see a little bit of that red violet reflecting off that. So I'm doing here now, just trying to find that and just sort of lay that in. And so what I'm doing there is I'm just manipulating. See what I'm doing? Just moving back and forth between mixtures of those colors and kind of lay that into this. And then see how it adds some more of the blue-green to it. And then I begin to lay that in on the tops of these right here, like this. Now you notice I haven't gone into any limbs. It's better, it works better, I found technically, when you're doing forest. It's better to lay all the foliage in and get the lights and shadows adjusted on the foliage before you start putting in limbs, because it can get really, really tedious if you try to squeeze limbs into all that. Now I'm going to throw some of this in here now, kind of cut that yellow that I'm seeing there in the distance. There we go. That's better. Just let a little bit of that yellow-green pop through there. And we need a little bit of that over here. Now in the going towards the bottom, those greens are still in shadow, but they're in what we call shallow shadow. And that simply means that the shadow is not as deep. It's not a deep shadow. And so what I'll do there then is I'll pull a little bit of this darker color into the middle value green, the darker yellow green into the middle value, and just make the value a little darker. See, it doesn't have to be very light. And so you can see what we see there in the differentiation is that we see that reflective light on those leaves that are in shadow. And we can see those leaves in shadow because of that reflected light. And so then we just throw a little bit of that and allow the dark to come through. And once you get started in a direction like that, you're going to find how easy it is to build forest, to build foliage, thick foliage that the person suggested. If you just take it as in layers, where you start out with just the whole thing in shadow. Lift out where you see light. Just lift it out in one single value. Then begin to put the values and colors, the colors in their value areas that you see in those areas where you have left the shadow. That is the shadow side of no tan. And then go and do the same thing for the light side, where you just lay in general values and colors, and then begin to put your details in. I think you'll find that if you use that simple approach, you can do any kind of thick foliage, or you'll be surprised if you use that approach how it helps the whole painting process. Give it a try. And I tell you what, if you use this as a little exercise instead of a full painting, so many people want to get right to it and make a painting so they can show it, and well, never mind about that. But nevertheless, do lots of exercises to get the flow going for yourself so that you feel confident about how you can make this work. Then commit it to a painting. I think you'll find yourself much more pleased with how your work turns out. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to dyingminds.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.